One thing to clarify at the very beginning, all the material I'm using is straight from the NMC website. This is not my presentation, this is their guidance. And that's really important because this is the one version of the truth, because it's really something about which revalidation has started to generate myths, but I point to the NMC website as the place to go. So all this is from there. I'm going to romp through it relatively quickly because I think it's really important we have some discussion, but interrupt me at any time to ask questions. And this is as meaningful to me as it is to you because I am a nurse and midwife and I revalidate in December. So this is very real. I'm presuming most of you are nurses and are interested in it for your own purposes, but there may be some of you who are going to be confirmers, who are not nurses, and will go through the process on that basis. The other assumption I'm making is that everyone has declared that they've met the PrEP standards since goodness knows when they were introduced. So what I will major on are the differences between PrEP and revalidation. So assuming that you've said every third year to the NMC you've met those standards, this is going to be easy. Okay, there are no traps in here. It is straightforward and not at all difficult. It's actually really important for our professional integrity and for our development as professionals and registrants. So I'll go through this and then please stop me at any time to make sure that I'm being clear, or if there is anything that you want to ask as we go along, that'd be great. So what is revalidation? It's a process of staying on the register. Every third year we get something from the NMC to say we declare that we have met certain standards of our own professional development. So this is about that process. And that 3-year cycle is really important to keep in mind because it's so easy sometimes to look at all the requirements that we need to meet and think, oh, I can't possibly do that in 1 year. So this is only every 3 years. So, you know, in some of you, for a 30-year career, you'll only do this 10 times. So it's not going to be particularly onerous. What's it aimed to do? Well, it's really to connect us as registrants with the new code. The code was launched in March 2015 and it's very different from the previous code. Certainly when I was a Director of Nursing, I used to keep the UKCC and previous codes in my desk drawer for disciplinaries and other stodgy things to go through. But this one, the new one, I've already well thumbed it to make sure that I can revalidate against it. And it's a very different document, a much more live document. I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. And so much of it was developed from the scandals like Shipman, which led to medical revalidation, and the other regulating bodies needing a newer system, a more modern system to keep people on the register. And also from mid-staffs where there were questions about the previous system, people keeping up to date and being able to register. And one of the things I think that has been unhelpful about that is that it then muddies the water between revalidation, reflection, and your ability to stay on the register with performance and performance management and appraisal. It is not about performance. It is not about appraisal. There are times when the two can be joined together, and you might find that you do revalidation as part of appraisal, or appraisal is part of your revalidation. But they are two distinct activities. So we're about improving standards, reflecting on practice, making sure that we can meet these standards for the NMC. But it's also good for the public to make sure that they have confidence and trust in people who are registered by the NMC. That was one thing that came out of mid-staffs, is the fact that there were concerns about how good nurses were and how the public reacted to what the NMC did as a consequence. So there's a bit more about that. For us, it's clear what we need to do. There's also something in this for employers. And there's guidance on the NMC website about employers as well and their part in this. And people have already been speaking to me today about, well, can employers meet all the CPD requirements and all that sort of thing? Well, there's the other side of that coin as well, is do you want to work for an employer that doesn't let you revalidate and meet your CPD requirements? And for the NMC, it strengthens their regulatory activity. It gives them greater confidence about who's on the register and much better information about who's on the register as well. Revalidating is this 3-yearly cycle, and you are given plenty of warning about when that date is coming, so you get your revalidation material ready. So it's ready and able to be submitted to the UKCC, the NMC, when they ask for it, and that's at least a month before your actual renewal date. So plenty of time to do the last bit of the process. But I would encourage you not to leave everything to the last bit of the process. And because this is a 3-yearly cycle, start gathering evidence about your revalidation as soon as you can. Keep in a portfolio, whether that's paper, electronic, a box under the bed, it doesn't really matter. But keep the evidence so that you can make it easy for yourself when it comes to the point. The journey. You're reflecting on the last 3 years, so it's really important to use evidence that comes from that period and not older evidence. In the 12 months before renewal, it's really helpful to have the confirmation and reflective discussions fairly close to renewal, otherwise they become irrelevant. So, but 12 months I think still gives enough flexibility. 60 days before revalidation application date, you will get the ability to apply online, and you will need an NMC online account, which also makes clear when your renewal date is, so there's no question about that. And then once it's processed by the NMC, your registration is renewed. Easy. It is not complicated. It is straightforward. It is a very positive experience. I'm yet to do it, but I have done confirmation for a number of people, and it's been really quite purposeful in reflecting how that's done, and I will touch on some of that later. The code you'll recognise has been revised, and I'll just flick on to the next slide, because these 4 elements are the things to bear in mind when you're going through your revalidation process, particularly the reflective accounts and patient and practice feedback. And the reflective discussion, because these elements of prioritising people, practising effectively, preserving safety and promoting professionalism and trust are the things that you need to bear in mind when you're constructing your revalidation forms, so that you can say this reflection relates to that bit of the code. And it doesn't have to be complicated, it's just referring to the paragraph where you think it's relevant. You don't have to have something in every section. So important to use it in that way and think about it in those 4 sections. So the requirements, practice hours, 450 hours over 3 years, no different from prep. So it shouldn't be difficult for anyone in this room. You do not have to keep your off duties and rosters and evidence of that sort of detail. If you've got a job description that says you're employed full-time as a nurse, then that is your evidence. No question about it. Dual registration is a bit more difficult because you have to have 900 hours of practice, but that only applies if you're a nurse and a midwife. So if you or your colleagues are a general nurse and a mental health nurse, that's all on part 1 of the register, that's all 450 hours. So don't think that it gets overly complicated when it comes to practice hours if you've got 2 registrations. It's only 2 registrations if you're on part 1 and part 2 if you're a nurse and a midwife. So 35 hours CPD, same as prep, not difficult over 3 years really, and we've all declared that we've done it. The real difference is that 20 of those hours must be participatory. So anything like this where you talk to colleagues and learn in the same room is countable against that. And that's just to guard against people doing online CPD the whole time and just being focused and isolated. So this is about a greater network, about team discussions, about learning in an active way rather than being isolated, which is what they want to guard against. And what counts as CPD, I think, is something that's really important because so much has been focused on study days, conferences and all that sort of thing. Very useful and very important and, of course, legitimate to count them. But actually, some of these other things are really important too. You know, if you're reading a research paper, That is CPD. If you then discuss it with a colleague, you can use that as reflection. And, building all those things in that you do routinely and counting them as CPD is really important. You probably have a relationship with someone who helps you develop your practice or as a sounding board for your practice. Well, why not call them a coach or a mentor? That relationship is really important, and it gets you into the thinking about CPD. It's continuing professional development. How am I professionally developing is what you need to capture. This is not just a list of hours. So it's really important that we flex our thinking about how we achieve that. Practice-related feedback is new. So 5 pieces over 3 years, don't forget. So that's not particularly difficult. And I made a slip of the tongue earlier and nearly said patient-related feedback, but it's actually practice. So it's not necessarily from patients or about patients. So it could be your organisation's patient survey, the national thing that gets done periodically. How do you use that? How do you think about that? That's feedback. What does it mean to you and your team? You may have a thank you card just to the ward or the clinical team or anyone else, not necessarily to an individual. Because it's gone to your team, you can use it as feedback, provided you make sense of it and think about how that's impacted on you. It's only feedback if you relate some change in your thinking to it. And the purpose of feedback is really important. So it may reinforce good practice. It may not be that you need to change anything. It may not be that you need to improve your practice. It may be reinforcing that what you do already is excellent practice. And that's great. What we have to guard against, of course, is coercion from people to say, can you write me something to put in my portfolio? Simply not acceptable. And of course, guard against declaring any patient confidential material. You can use patient examples, but refer to them, patient A or whatever you want to. So it's completely anonymised. One of the things that's dawned on me since we've been developing this process is that I now notice much more when people email me and say, oh, thank you very much for that comment, it was really helpful. Feedback on my practice. And it's something that as simple as that could be used and that's really important provided you reflect on it properly. So I'd encourage you to actually do that to each other. Why not be a little bit more open with those comments in emails, so you've given someone the evidence that they've had some practice-related feedback. So it doesn't relate to appraisal. This is not about performance. This is about your professionalism. Types of feedback: formal, informal, written, verbal, positive or constructive. Constructive being the opposite side of the coin of negative, so that you're completely learning about it. Someone suggested earlier that they used a complaint. Absolutely right. Make sense of the complaint and what does that do for you. So the form there in miniature is what the NMC provides. Everything the NMC wants to capture is on a form, on a template that you can download from the NMC website, so don't feel the need to invent anything of your own. It makes it very clear about what to record, and they've even produced this document, which is a booklet of completed forms. These are complete fiction, but it does help you get through the process of what's expected, what sort of things to record on each of the forms. So use that as guidance. It's really helpful. And the one thing that I think a lot of people get concerned about is the reflective account. And this is a reflective account, 1.5 sides of A4. It is not War and Peace. It is really important to just cite what the issue is. What did you reflect on? How does it relate to the code? And what do you change in your practice, if anything at all? Straightforward, simple. We do it in our heads all the time. This just captures it on paper. So all that guidance is there on the NMC website. 5 of those. So over 3 years, not particularly difficult. You just need to choose which ones help your practice best. That's the form I've just shown you. And the reflective discussion, once you've got your 5 pieces of reflective discussion, you need a reflective counts, you need to discuss them with a registrant. And that's really important discussion between professionals about, well, what does this actually mean to me in practice? What do I need to do to develop? And so on. Now, because I'm a confirmer, I've had a number of these reflective discussions because I've done registrant to registrant and I'm a confirmer as well. So I can do the whole thing in one process, which is really good. And the sorts of people that come to me for confirmation are people that don't have employers or bosses. You know, they're independent and won't get it from anywhere else. So you might need to think flexibly if you develop your careers about how you, as an independent practitioner, find your reflective discusser and your confirmer. So it's a really important thing to do. And just one thing that has struck me about each of the reflective discussions that I've conducted is that I've pushed quite hard to discuss, why is this important to you as a nurse? Where is the nursing in this? Because so many of the elements of practice could be general management, or they could be something that doesn't necessarily refer to patients, but that's not important. The important thing is, what was the practice? How do you as a nurse add value to that? Why is it important? And that's why you have to relate it to the code. So keeping an eye on that is really important as well. That's recorded, and then I, as the person with whom the discussion is conducted, sign that with my PIN number, as well as you saying this is what we've discussed. And the little box here gives a summary of the discussion, 5 bullet points for each piece of evidence. It's not difficult. And the amount of time that I allow for that is an hour. Sometimes it's quicker, it's never longer because we're all busy, and it's really important to keep focused. So that in itself is not difficult because you can build that into something else if you really want to. Health and character declaration is not new, it's not different from PrEP. Professional indemnity is slightly different insofar as the law now requires us to have insurance or indemnity. Now, if you're employed, your employer takes vicarious liability, so you don't need to worry about that unless you're in independent or a strange realm of practice. Confirmation I've talked a bit about, but if you're not clear who can confirm you, there's a little tool on the NMC website that leads you through, is this an appropriate person to be a confirmer? So if I'm not staying in the civil service till December, but if I were to, my confirmer would be a civil servant. And all that person would be doing is not marking my homework, not marking the quality of what I've done as part of the other bits of the process, the reflections and the feedback. They're saying, yes, he's met the 450 hours, yes, he's met the 35 hours of CPD and those other requirements of PrEP, and I've seen evidence that he has done that tick. Because I'm in full-time employment as a nurse and a midwife, that's easily met my 450 hours. No need to keep off duty or all that sort of detail and get into the realms of what is practice or not. And it's really important, nowhere does this talk about clinical practice. So you're all probably in clinical practice, which is fine. But if you get a job that is in research, education, management, you can practice that as a nurse, relate that to the code and keep revalidated. That is a legitimate thing to do. This is not about clinical practice. So I can revalidate as a civil servant because I am paid to advise ministers on nursing midwifery. I do not have to run around with bedpans and deliver babies anymore. So it's really important to make that distinction. And if your confirmer is straying from that, wave the guidance at them or find another confirmer. It's really important that gets done properly. They suggest it's usually the line manager, and that's fair enough. That's probably the person with the authority to sign it off and know that you've met those things. But they do not need to be an NMC registrant. So if your confirmer is not an NMC registrant, you need to have your reflective discussion with someone who is, and before the confirmation happens. That gives a bit of more detail about the role of the confirmer, but that's clarified on the NMC website with a tool that says how you can select a confirmer. And there's a confirmation form that just outlines that I confirm I have seen these bits of the requirements that have been met, and it's really important then that that's signed off. Keeping a portfolio, very good idea. Doesn't need to be electronic. There is no one version to use. It can be paper, but keep your evidence for the 3 years. That's the checklist: practice hours, continuing professional development, practice-related feedback, reflective accounts, reflective discussion, confirmation. That's all it is. Then the application, you get plenty of time to do this. The NMC don't require all the evidence to be uploaded. So, your thank you cards and things like that, they don't need to see. They don't need to see the detail of reflective discussions. They need the confirmation that it's actually happened. Some portfolios will be called for verification, which used to happen under PrEP, but no one ever seems to know anyone that had their portfolio asked for under PrEP. The NMC hasn't quite yet decided how to sample people for verification, and I think it's probably a bit early in the life of revalidation to do that with any rigour yet, but they have piloted the process. So someone in this room might be asked to verify that, and that is the point at which you do have to provide the evidence behind your portfolio. So I think that will be quite a small sample, and I think they will approach it on a risk-based method, so that if you are a risky practitioner, then you might be one of the groups that's called first for verification. So that won't apply to anyone in this room. All these resources are available on the NMC. So it's a great website. There's a microsite as well. I've deliberately used all their material just to demonstrate how straightforward it is. It's there for you, it's there for employers, it's there for confirmers. There are films and case studies as well from people from a whole range of practice, so it doesn't just demonstrate how to revalidate as a staff nurse on a surgical ward. It covers a lot of practice. And employer resources as well. So the employers can use this, and if you're an employer, then that's great. You can use that as an employee and say, look, employer, this is what is expected of you. So that's very helpful as well. And this is the summary final slide. So you need your NMC online account. That'll tell you when your renewal date is, which becomes your revalidation date. That's really important. The guidance is all there on that website. And start thinking now about with whom you might have as your reflective discussing, who you have your reflective discussion with, and who might be your confirmer if it's not obviously your line manager or someone else that you need to do. So that is it in a nutshell. I hope that's been relatively clear and it is relatively straightforward. And it demystifies some of the problems that have been emerging as revalidation has been developed. So it's only a modest difference from PrEP, but start thinking now about your reflections and your confirmations. Those are the particularly new elements.